Hey guys, welcome to Laurie's Little Studio. I'm Laurie, and today I have this in front of me. I have been wanting to kind of go over needles with you guys for some time, and as you might know if you've been following me for a while, thank you guys so much. I did print off the John James Needles Guide off of their website. I did not pay for it. There was not a charge associated with it, but it is something that I like to have on hand. I won't recommend any particular needles guide. There are books. There are this kind of download. There's websites where you can see different needles. This just happens to be what I use. So for the most part, that's what I'm going to reference when I am sewing. Oh, here they go. I was trying to find some John James. They generally come packaged a little differently than the Richard Hemming needles do, but for the most part, I mean, and you'll find really cute little collections from John James, but I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just using this needles guide. I also have a book that I used to sell in my shop, and I'll show that one to you as well. I don't know if this is still in print. I had it and sold it in my shop over 20 years ago. And it's called Point Well Taken. It also talks about thread. It's by Debbie Garbers and Janet F. O'Brien. There they are. This book's copyright is 96 and 97, published in Georgia. I have no idea. I had several copies and I sold them. They were well received, and I mean, they're pretty in-depth. So it's a book that has information about the different types of needles, and then you'll find these tips on almost exactly every single page in the book. So there's over there, here. It tells you how to use the sewing needles that you're using, when to use the sewing needles that you're using, the best way to use the sewing needles that you're using. And here we are in the hand sewing needles, which is kind of where I wanted to start. So between these two, we're going to have some of the same information. The reason that I like this one now is if you get to the guide, you have an actual detail of the needle. It is like the proper size of that needle. It shows you, for example, what it looks like. It says all of these needles right here are shown at actual size right here. I don't know if that's true of this. I don't know if their examples in this book are actual size. So let's just, for example, this needle right here is massive. I ordered this kit that I was doing. It was a little purse, a little clasp change purse. And this came in that kit. I never used it. I don't know why they included it, but it has turned out to be more of a tool that I can use for point turning, for silk ribbon embroidery. It has a really large eye. So you know, I don't know that it's going to actually be something I'm going to find in here, but I do have some fairly tiny sharps. So this is a 12. All right, right here it's showing, well, let me get you where you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So this right here is size 12. The one next to it is size 11 and 10 and 9, and they get larger as the numbers get smaller until you get to size 18, 17, and 16. And then the eye of those needles gets really big. But this is not a sharp. This is a tapestry needle, and I can tell right away because of the shape of the eye and how big the eye is. Let me get a piece of paper. We'll use the back of this. I think. So this is going to be a size 26 tapestry needle, and it just fits perfectly on the sample right here. Okay, so there's that. We also have pictures, very good pictures I might add, of quilting betweens and milliners. Sometimes a milliner needle is called a straw needle. Doing very decorative stitches like your smocking. Let me get this where you can see it. That's what you would be using these needles for. Quilting and I always say in between. Quilting / betweens would be for hand quilting. They say that sharps were used for carpets and rugs. They're known generally as carpet sharps. So it's a lot of heavy duty work right there. And then of course the tapestry / cross stitch. And you can see why those are that type of needle. They're blunt. They don't need to pierce fabric. They just need to go through an open weave. And I have an example of that type of needle somewhere. Right as I was, oh, here we go. So right here is a tapestry. And I think it's a 16. Let's see if I'm right. It's an 18. So right there is size 18 tapestry, and my 18 fits right on top of it beautifully. Okay. Now the other types of needles as we go through are, of course, the leather needle. They're kind of shaped like a little sword. They're described as being triangulated. They have a cutting edge, just like a little knife, and will go through leather. Also like a soft plastic, maybe pleather. Then we have the chenille, and they're also really, really good for cross stitch or tapestry. The difference being that these needles, the chenille needle is sharp, whereas the tapestry needle is not. Then we have darners. These are what people usually use for just everyday stitching, if they're going to be doing any stitching by hand. And then we have the long darners. So these are the regular shaped. They are sharp, but they're not razor sharp. The long darner is probably one of these. This right here is probably a long darner. Let's see, it looks like it's a 17 or a 20. Yes, it just fits perfectly right on that slot, and the eye is the same size. So this is a long darner. It is sharp, and I've enjoyed having it, even though I didn't know that it was going to come with that little kit that I purchased. Okay, and then we have the embroidery / crewel needles, which I think I had, yeah, here's a pack of size 8. Now these are Richard Hemmings. They're also made in England. And these are the crewel needles, size 8. These are teeny, teeny, tiny needles. And they're generally used for one strand of cotton. I used to do a lot of my smocking with these crewel needles. I sold them as for that purpose as well in my shop. There's an example of some embroidery done there. And then the easy threading Calyx needle. I don't have any Calyx that I'm aware of. There might be one in that John James wheel If there is, I would be very surprised. Those are generally used if you have difficulty threading a needle. And the point of it is, not the point, but the reason that they were developed is so that you could slip the thread through this little, I don't know, like a little cut in the metal right across the top, and your thread would just pop down in and stay in there. I've never used one. I don't know anything about them other than that's what they're used for people who really cannot thread a needle. And then we have beading needles. Beading needles are long, skinny. These are kind of cross-stitch needles. I have a pack. Oh, here we go. All right. So these are beading needles, and their eye is really teeny and they're long so that you can load up a whole bunch of beads on the needle before you pass it down onto whatever it is that you're using, whether it's clear thread or some type of floss. They're very tiny and they're made for very, very tiny little beads that will fit right over the top, like Mill Hill glass beads, that kind of thing. Okay, and then there is the short beading needle. Those are John James 107 is the one that you use if you're using a bead embroidery needle or a short beading needle, and they don't really show an example of these two. But the interesting information for those who like facts and figures would be needle length. It gives you millimeter and diameter. So if you need to know the diameter of the sewing needle that you are using, this particular little chart has that information. So we're going to go with sharps, and then carpet sharps, which are those size 16, 17, and 18. These go all the way up to 12. Remember, back here, up to 12, and then, or down to 12. So size 1, which is the largest in that grouping, all the way down to the tiniest, which is 12, and then moving back up, you have the 16, 17, and 18, and that's what this information right here is. Then we're going to go into the ballpoint sharps. Ballpoint means that it's not sharp on the end. It's like a ballpoint pen, and it will work its way through open weave fabric. Then you have, of course, the quilting and the betweens, and those are also sized all the way up to 12. And the big eye quilting, I've never seen a big eye quilting needle. I've heard about them, but I've not purchased them and I've not used them. They would be sharp and they would have a large eye, making it easy to thread. Then we have the gloves and the leather, which we talked about. We have long darners, we have tapestry cross stitch, chenille. Chenille is the sharp version of the tapestry. Tapestry is a ballpoint. And then we have the beading needles and the short beading needles. And then we're going to go on to, this feels like 2 pages, weird. Ballpoint bead, long beading, and then doll needles. Doll needles are really long, like this right here. They're very long because you're having to pull thread through a lot of filler to the other side. We have bodkins. A bodkin is, I'll just pop a picture of a metal as they're talking about here. I used to have a whole bunch. I sold them in the shop and I can't find any of them anywhere. But they're fantastic, and if I can find one, I'm going to use it. Okay, and then primary needle is just your basic needle. It's 33 millimeters long. It is 1.16 in diameter, all the way up to 33.5 length and 0.86 diameter. So you have a range here, and primary needles are generally your all-purpose needle. Then we have the saddlers and harness, that would be leather needles again, saddlers betweens, and the bookbinders, straw. And that's the end of that. But if you're interested in going to the website, I will put that information in the description box down below this video. So if you were interested in purchasing needles from this book, I would read this little about this needle guide at the beginning right here, because it tells you what to look for. So you're going to look for this number, and then you're going to see it on the website, and then it'll come in either one of these or one of their other little packaging, one of the cute little ways of packaging their needles. But we don't have to buy John James. I mean, there's a lot of different needles. I personally like them because they tend to be less snaggy. They are very smooth. They don't have burrs. I've not run across a John James needle yet, or either a Richard Hemming needle. Sometimes when you receive, like for example, this pack right here came with another kit that I ordered. I don't know anything about these needles. They are, other than the fact that they're sewing needles, they have a gold eye, and they're milliner, size 3 through 9. They're 16, there were 16. And I have found that they are snaggy. I don't know how to describe it, but they have, I think it came with an embroidery book that I bought, but it feels almost like there's a grit on this needle. Sometimes you can get that to come off. I think one of these little ones down here was just absolutely ridiculous. Was it this one? Let's just see. Yeah, this one right here, you can actually see. I don't know if I can get that to show up. You can see it on this needle. There's some grit, and it's visible to the naked eye. There. It's a divot in this needle, which to me makes it unusable. I don't want to use a needle that's going to either snag my fabric or, make my thread less effective or something. I do hang on to these though, just in case. You never know, and I have such a hard time throwing things away. Okay, and then recently, again, in just a couple videos back, I opened these. I ordered these Bowen, France sewing needles. These are Sharps, and the reason I ordered these is because I couldn't bear to pay almost $30 shipping to have John James needles sent to me. So until I can find a local way to purchase John James, I thought, well, I'll try these. They were available stateside, which seems odd to me that I can get needles from France here, but I was going to have to pay super expensive shipping to get them to come from England. But that could just be the times. That could be why so many other things in this particular 2022 version of life are not available. I don't know. I haven't really had an opportunity to use these very much, but they are not snaggy. They are just as silky smooth as the John James and Richard Hemmings that I've used in the past. They're very pretty. You can see, nice and shiny. And it's a set that is the Sharps with big eyes, which I think that's also clear to see. And they are from size 3 to size 9. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at what that would translate to in this particular book. So here's the sharps. And these are not big eye, but, oh, and the way I get needles out of this little pouch without hurting myself is I'll just lift with the point of another needle until it clears, and then I can just pull it out, okay? So I'm going to assume this is the size 3. It's the biggest. So if I put the eye of the needle right there and hold it, okay, so the John James size 3 is slightly, a fraction of an inch larger than the Bowen size 3. That's fine. There aren't very many times when I find the needle length to be a critical issue in my sewing, especially if it's just a fraction of an inch. So, all right, and then this, what was the smallest? 9. So let's look at a size 9. Yeah, just a fraction of an inch shorter than the John James. Okay, so right here, I don't know if you can see that little tiny bit of gray line that is showing past the needle. It would not have any effect on my sewing whatsoever. Let's just see what information we find in this book. So this one will tell us what type of sewing these needles will be used for. So hand sewing needles, which has its own little section, and they talk about machine needles well, let's just read this correctly. Unlike machine needles, and by that they mean, you know, this right here. These are sewing machine needles. Unlike these, hand sewing needles are backwards in sizing. So if it's a high number, it means a smaller diameter and shorter length. So when you are stitching with large fibers, you would choose a needle with an eye that is large enough to accommodate the fiber. The needle should be large enough around to pierce the fabric and make an opening so the fiber can pass through the fabric without stressing the fiber or the fabric. And when they say fiber, they mean like thread, yarn, silk, whatever they're talking about. So here is a whole bunch of different types, and again they mention that Calyx with the little split at the top. And then they're going to talk about what type of thread to use with what type of needle. So we're going to say if we're talking about spools, for example, this right here, apparently we're going to talk about high quality or better quality threads which are cross wound on a spool. A straight wound spool would be like, say, a Singer. I don't have, oh, there's one way up there. Nah, I'll try to grab it. Okay. Okay, so this is a straight wound. It doesn't look like it because I have wound it myself a few times, but right here you can see, and by straight wound they mean that it's going to go in a straight up and down instead of at an angle, which is the way this is sulky, but you can see that it is cross wound. I think you can see that. There you go. So you can see it goes up and then it crosses and it goes up and it crosses. So that's cross wound and this is straight wound. And the differences, I mean, qualities of thread truly can vary wildly all over the place. So, you know that delicate fabrics will need a smaller stitch length, and thicker threads need a longer stitch length and a loose machine tension setting. And then we have the tips here. I'm not going to read all of this book, but there's some interesting little bits and pieces in here. They're talking about YLI lingerie and bobbin thread, Sew Bob, which is a lightweight continuous filament nylon thread. And then we have the Madeira bobbin fill, which is a superfine 70 weight polyester thread. I have a 50 weight DMC cotton thread that's super, super fine like that. Then there's the Sulky, which that's what this is. And these are talking about bobbins. And then there's GIMP. If you're going to do a corded pin tuck or something, you would be using GIMP. And then fishing line, you can definitely use it. It's mentioned here as well. There's the water-soluble basting thread that just washes away, so you don't have to pull those basting threads out. There is the monofilament thread, which I just showed you. There's elastic thread, which is fantastic. There's fusible threads, and then we talk about the feet that you use, stabilizers that you use, all of these things that you would need to use to do certain things with your threads and your needles. And then here we go with our fabric, thread, needle, and stitch length. So this is why this book was very popular. If you weren't sure, if you were doing a project that was very specific and it called for chiffon fabric or voile, sand-washed silk, you could look under the thread selection here to get the proper thread to use for these types of fabrics. And then, once you've got those two things chosen, you can decide what type of needle that you were going to need. For example, ultra suede light, I would not have known back then, 20 years ago, that you would use a jersey ballpoint needle to sew with the ultra suede light. I had no idea. And then the type of stitch, or not the type of stitch, but the length of stitch. So how many stitches on your sewing machine you would need to properly stitch this fabric with this thread and that needle. And then we get into twin needles and what they're for. This is a 2.0 80. Oh, let me get it where you can actually see it. You have to have 2 spools of thread on the top and 1 bobbin. And what happens is the bobbin will zigzag, the top will do straight stitches. They make beautiful pin tucks. It's a fantastic sewing notion. They're not inexpensive, but if you can get your hands on one, I recommend that you give it a go. So a wing needle is also a interesting sewing notion. Wing needles have little blades that run down each side. You can see, that's why they call it a wing, but it is sharp on these sides and it will cut into the fabric like a little blade, and it leaves behind the very telltale sign of a hem stitch. So you can do all kinds of fun things with your wing needles. Okay, and again, there are, I don't know how many different books out there for figuring out what size needle, when to use it, how to use it, what size it is, and all of that other information. I have not looked deeply at this website, but I have a feeling that it has a lot of the same information that this book has, or many other books just like this book. So if you're interested and you need more guidance on your needles, you know, if you have a pack of needles like this and you're thinking to yourself, why what are all these different sizes for, what, like there's little teeny ones, and then there's these longer ones, and there's really long, and the big eyes and the little eyes. What in the world are they for? I ended up getting this a long time ago at a Goodwill, and it's funny because they aren't going to age out unless they get wet. They should be just fine. And then I also had this Coats pack of Embroidery Crewel nickel-plated needles with their little plastic holder. Let's see, what is this? Okay, so these are leather needles. I knew I had these somewhere. So I can kind of show you what that John James book was talking about. Let me find... I don't know if it would be easy for you to see this or not, but it is very sharp right down here at the very end. I'm trying so hard. Right down here, and it has a little tiny bit of a curve. Okay, so there's that. I just found a bodkin. Oh my goodness, you guys. Who knew? It's been in here for, God, 20 years? All right, so here, how funny is that? I was just looking for this. Okay, flip this over. Well, you guys are my good luck charm. All right, so these two are antiques that I think I got out of an old sewing machine, and I don't use them. This one is the one that I used to sell in my shop. Look at the difference. So this is for, you can put a piece of elastic or you can put silk ribbon in either one, either this little, there, it'll show, either in this little spot right here or in this little spot right here. And then you just pull it like it's on there and you weave it through, and then you pull this, and it will help get the thick bits through the casing that you've made. I have been known to pull my elastic through here. Let's see if I can find some. Here we go. So let's just go ahead and thread this through. And once I get that through, I have been known to put a straight pin to hold it on, or I'll run it under my sewing machine and do a forward stitch, back stitch, forward stitch, back stitch. And I know it's not going to come off. I don't have to worry about that being an issue. And then by the time I get around to the other end, you know, I can just pin this, and then I've got my casing filled with the elastic I needed it to be filled with. But if I were going to do some silk ribbon on a piece of lace beading, which, as you might know, lace beading has holes like this, and then you just take your ribbon and fill those holes with ribbon. You can put that around a little infant baby's sleeve and then tie it with a bow. It's so cute. So that's what this is. But these were found, now they may not be antique, but they feel like they've been used over and over again. And I do remember having found these in an old sewing machine. So there's this one. I think you might be able to see through it, the little opening right here, and then the smaller one for thread. And then this one is a little bit wider right here with a little bit bigger hole for thread. So there's the 1/4 inch mark right there, and there's the end of the needle right there, and it is resting on the 1 inch mark. So there we go. 1 1/4 inches. They're so tiny. I don't know. Back in the day, I used to cross stitch, oh my God, like a crazed cross stitcher. I couldn't get enough projects. Then I started sewing and heirloom, and before you know it, I had opened a shop and loving my life. It was so great. I need a piece of tape. There we go. Okay. They'll stay in there. All right. What other interesting bits and bobs? Nope. Nope. Now I do have some heavy, when I write on a pack of needles like that, it means I used it one time. These are, yes, I was going to show these needles. These are the Embroidery Gold needles. They are size 75 11s. I usually go by the 11. So if I'm looking at another pack, I will go by the bottom number. I know that it's a 70-10 or an 80-12. What do I have here? I'm not going to even look at the wing needles because they're all different and kind of confusing. Okay, this is a 90-14. There's a 90-14 in there. A lot of these universal needles will have 70 to 90. Here's another pack. What's this right here? Okay, these are 18s right here. This was a nice big pack of needles that included 4 or 5 70-10s, 1, 2, 3, 4 80-12s, and 2 90-14s. Those are my beading needles we've looked at. These are cross stitch. These are some more counted cross stitch. I wasn't kidding. This I don't need. Oh, I was going to try to show you a ballpoint. These are 80-12s. Let's see. Microtex needles are very sharp, and these are Jersey ballpoint needles. So if you're sewing with a knit fabric, you don't necessarily need to pierce the fabric. You need to just allow the needle to separate the fibers and create a stitch, which will be a zigzag stitch. So they are not sharp. I mean, you can feel there's a bit of a sharpness there, but they are rounded on the end. I need to put this back where I got it from. I'm funny. They also do have sizes. So you're going to have the same size situation going on. The 70-10, 80-12, 90-14. And then there's a drilling needle. Drilling needles are triple. So you can see it has 3 needles. Very fancy work with those. More universal. And then I have some jeans needles, and they are heavy duty. They are 116, so 100/16. And when you pick up one of these, you can tell it's like picking. It almost feels like the difference between picking up a fine sewing pin like this and a nail. It's very different. You would need this for sewing on heavy denim in like layers. So if you were stitching 2 layers of denim together and creating a seam allowance, you would want a nice heavy duty machine needle for that. Okay, here's some more. These are universals, but they are all 80-12. So there's that. And I think I had another pack over here. So when I purchased Brother Louie, my brother's sewing machine that filled in nicely for me when George, my Bernina, was in the shop, Brother Louie came with a pack of, well, it's just one 8012 class needle. I've never used a class needle before. And they had on the back this wonderful little guide. It shows you the point of each of the needles that they sell. So here is a jeans denim needle, and here's a sharp. And the difference between the sharp, let me get it where there's no glare. Hold on just a second. Get my light behind my camera. There we go. Okay. So here's a universal right here. There's embroidery. There's quilting, which is pretty sharp. And here's a sharp, and look at that, how it, let me do this, how it kind of skinnies down like that. We have the jeans, we have a ballpoint, and you can see it's rounded on the end. Top stitch, twin, serger, hem stitch, anti-glue I've never heard of. Leather must have a very sharp side to it. Sewing with metallic thread, and then a stretch which works kind of the same as a ballpoint depending on the fiber. But I haven't even opened it yet because I clearly don't need to. I have so many needles. I'm kind of hanging on to it, and if I do need it, I will have it. It's just your basic universal 8012, of which I have a billion. Now, I will also tell you, in your sewing machine, I'm not an expert, but I do know that needles can and do degrade quickly in a sewing machine. If you sew as often as I do, you do need to change your needles. It makes a huge difference in your sewing. I don't recommend personally just sewing one day, you know, for say a couple hours on a domestic sewing machine and throwing that needle away. I would check it with the next day or the next time you sew. Into that again. Okay, let's open up. Okay. So I'm not a sewing machine needle expert. I really am not. I just know what works for me, and I'm just going to say that my recommendation to anyone who has a domestic sewing machine like I do, make sure that you are changing out your sewing machine needles before they get dull, before they can damage your fabric or even hurt your sewing machine. It should be pretty frequently, actually. I would say if you sew all day one day, you're working on a project and you're working on it all day long, and I would say all day long would be about 6 hours, maybe 7. Change out your needle. Just take that one out and do away with it. I usually just put all my used needles in a, you know, like a plastic jar. I want to use something that won't break. I wouldn't want to use a glass jar and then have a whole bunch of needles come out of it. You know, glass and needles, my goodness. But if you use like a plastic container, something that, you know, you can put needles in for a long time, then you can just dispose of them all in one go instead of throwing. I don't recommend throwing a used needle in the garbage can and then disposing of the garbage, because somebody could get stabbed. And trust me, I speak from experience. We don't need that happening to somebody. So, all right, I am just kind of putting all my needles in here, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to get this in the drawer, so I'll just leave it out. Okay, so like I said earlier, I have been wanting to go over that with you. I don't, under any circumstances, consider myself an expert. I'm not. But I did used to sell sewing needles in my shop. I had a lot of questions. I actually took classes. I remember I had a student who literally laughed at me, and oh, there's a horrible looking pen, and she said, I can't imagine anything more boring than listening to somebody talk about sewing needles. But I thought, if you're going to do this, if you're going to become someone who sews, who takes fabric and thread and needles and creates things, you kind of need to know your tools. So that was my reason for doing what I was doing, and I don't regret it. Learning how to tell the difference, or knowing what size you need when you are starting a new project, it just kind of takes some of the stress and worry out. Okay, so I am going to pick up my quilting project and start working on that right now. I'm not going to drag you guys through that project with me because it's just me taking a needle and some thread and just stitching around some circles that I've drawn until I get this huge piece of fabric. It's not really that huge. It's about the size of a baby blanket. Until I get all these circles drawn, and then I'm going to create View D of the McCall's Fashion Accessories M5438. And when I'm ready to do that, I'll bring you along with me. We'll do a video of getting this ready and making that bag, which I can't wait to make. I've been very anxious to get that done. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. I would so love to have you join us, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.